Saludos, Víctor. Mucho tiempo sin conversar. Nosotros nos definimos como un partido marxista, leninista. No somos stalinistas, ni somos trotsquistas. Sí asumimos que hay muchos pensadores y muchos revolucionarios que tienen aspectos muy negativos o cometieron graves errores, pero también tú puedes encontrar en muchos de ellos grandes aciertos. Entonces cualquier idea, ya sea de Stalin, de Trotsky, de Bakunin, de cualquier pensador de profundidad revolucionaria, que nosotros entendamos tiene validez, Gramsci, nosotros nos identificamos, es decir, nos nutrimos de la teoría socialista, no importa quién sea, pero el partido no es stalinista, por el contrario, tiene profundas críticas del stalinismo, aunque le reconoce a Stalin un enorme papel en la derrota del fascismo, pero no puede reconocerle otras virtudes en el exterminio de la dirección del partido bolchevique. Igual que con Trotsky. Trotsky llegó en una posición ultra izquierdista, que estuvo al suicidar la revolución naciente, porque bajo la teoría de la revolución permanente, que no era propia de él, pero él la asumió con mucha fuerza, creía que había que seguir haciendo lo que tú no puedes, porque no tienes fuerza, es liquidar lo poco que has ganado. Además de una concepción extravagantemente obrerista, que en aquel tiempo podía tener alguna justificación, porque las sociedades eran o burguesas, campesinas y trabajadores. Pero el mundo actual, tú tienes muchos sectores de clases que no caen exactamente en esas categorías, o clases que se han transformado en muchos aspectos y que tú tienes que considerarlas para producir los cambios del mundo de hoy.
What up, what up, what up? Que lo que, mi gente? This is Victor Coronado alongside Nick Ayala. We are Anticonquista. Please like, please subscribe, please share with your friends, your family members, your comrades. We are at anticonquista.com, and you can find us on all social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. This is the 10th episode of Nuestra America, Stalinism or Trotskyism. Neither. We are Carpinchistas, and we'll get into that in just a bit. The voice that you heard was the voice of Professor Juan Gómez, who is un militante del partido La Fuerza de la Revolución, which is a Marxist-Leninist party. So I will be translating in just a bit. But Nick, how you doing, brother?
I'm good, man. How you been doing?
I'm doing all right, man. I'm doing all right. So let's get into it. But before we do, let me just quickly translate a little bit there. And he said a lot there, so I'm going to try to capture the essence of what he said. So today's program was inspired by a question I had posed to Professor Juan Gómez of La Fuerza de la Revolución, which is, again, a Marxist-Leninist party based out of the Dominican Republic, or based in the Dominican Republic. And the question I asked him was a simple question. I said, Profesor Juan Gómez, una pregunta. Ustedes tienen el partido tiene una tendencia stalinista o troikita? Right. Does the political party La Fuerza have a Stalinist or Trotskyite tendency? And this was his response. We're a Marxist-Leninist party. We're not Stalinists. and we're not Trotskyites. We recognize the grave errors made by revolutionaries, past revolutionaries, but we also recognize their successes. So we recognize the contributions made by any profound thinker of revolutionary ideology. We nourish ourselves with socialist theory. We have serious criticisms of Stalin, but we recognize his enormous role in defeating fascism. And we have criticisms of Trotsky. He took on a very ultra leftist position with his theory of permanent revolution, which, by the way, wasn't his own theory, but he assumed that position very forcefully. Permanent revolution would have led to political suicide of the nascent revolutions taking place at the time. His theory may have had some justification in the past because societies, as we know, used to be organized in a way where you had the bourgeoisie, laborers, and farmers. But in the actual world, you have many sectors or classes that don't necessarily fit any of those categories, or classes that have transformed themselves in many different aspects. And you have to consider them or take them into account in order to produce the changes you want to see in today's world. And so that's, we started with that, and it got us thinking because, and that you've heard me say this before, us say this before, where, we get into these ideological discussions on the so-called left. And I'm not sure, if this is very fruitful or beneficial for specifically, again, we're third worldist and I am a brown nationalist, specifically speaking to our people, who get caught up in these ideological, debates about who has the correct line and whatnot. So, Nick, I'll stop there and wait on your response, and then we can kind of go back and forth.
Yeah. Do you want to do the Fidel quote?
Oh, yeah. So we have absolutely. So we have a quote by Fidel Castro. Now, this is coming from Fidel Castro, right? This is not coming from some white communists in Europe or in the United States. No, this is Fidel Castro saying this. And you can find this quote in Fidel Castro's My Life, right? And that's a conversation he had with Ignacio Ramonet. But on page 181 of that book, Ignacio asked him, "It's been said that Che even has some Trotskyite sympathies. Do you see that in him at that point?" And this was Fidel Castro's response. He goes, No. He goes, "Let me tell you really what Che was like. Che already had, as I've said, a political education. He had come naturally to read a number of books on theories of Marx, Engels, and Lenin. He was a Marxist. I never heard him talk about Trotsky. He defended Marx, he defended Lenin, and he attacked Lenin, or rather, he criticized the cult of personality, Stalin's errors. But I never heard him speak really about Trotsky. He was a Leninist, and to a degree, he even recognized some merits in Stalin, industrialization, some of those things. I, deep inside, was more critical of Stalin than Che was because of some of his mistakes. He was to blame, in my view, for the invasion of the USSR in 1941 by Hitler's powerful war machine, without the Soviet forces ever hearing a call to arms. Stalin also committed serious errors. Everyone knows about his abuse of force, the repression, and his personal characteristics, the cult of personality. But yet he also showed tremendous merit in industrializing the country, in moving the military industry to Siberia. Those are decisive factors in the world's fight against Nazism. So when I analyze it, I weigh his merits and also his great errors. And one of those was when he purged the Red Army due to Nazi misinformation that weakened the USSR militarily on the very eve of the fascist attack. And then, Ignacio said he disarmed himself. He said, he disarmed himself. He weakened himself. And he signed that terrible German-Soviet pact, the Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, and other things. I've talked about this before. I'm not going to add anything else. So, there you have it. And I think it's important for folks to. Well, I'll stop there and just let me listen to your response on all that, Nick. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll be honest. I got a bias. I'm more of a admirer. Well, first of all, I would consider myself a Leninist, a Marxist-Leninist, right? And I more so admire Stalin rather than Trotsky. And we kind of had this discussion.
Same here.
Right. Yeah. And Carlos brought this up too. You know, some of Trotsky's ways of thinking were very Eurocentric, right? In Zach Cope, he has many quotes from Trotsky that show how Trotsky, one of the things that Trotsky believed was that socialist revolution would come to Europe. And then once it got to Europe, it would be spread into the colonies, and the Europeans would bring forward the backwards, black and brown people throughout the world into socialism. And
which is what Professor Juan Gomez was alluding to in his
right.
in his response to me. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And it's interesting too. That's the one part about Trotsky that I always bring back to today, because I hear a lot of people basically make that same argument today, which is the exact opposite argument of what we're making. But anyway, I had biases against Trotsky for that. And as for Stalin, I admired him not so much for his theoretical contributions, his practices, which I do think were very admirable. But one of the things that I liked about Stalin was that he was the first working class leader. He came from a working class background, right? He was the first working class leader of the first working class nation. And I think that it has a symbolic importance, which needs that should be, recognized. That being said, that being said, these two individuals lived like 100 years ago, right? What does their specific, and we can pick out certain things theoretically that they contributed to Marxism that I think could still apply today. For example, right? One of the reasons why I so invested in supporting nations like Iran, who aren't socialist but are still anti-imperialist, is because of what Stalin wrote about the importance of supporting, nations fighting against imperialism and that idea of self-determination. That's something that he has written about. He theorized that still applies today. But outside of that, what exactly, if we're having these debates about Stalin, Trotsky, anarchism, Mao, like all these figures that lived, over 50 years ago, we can't have these debates if it's not applicable to the context and the material conditions that exist for our communities right now. And if you are going to bring up these individuals, these historical figures, then you better make them apply to the conditions that exist today, whether it be locally, regionally, internationally, it doesn't matter. You just got to make it applicable. And I think part of the reason why we're having this discussion today is because we see a lot of people have debates, Stalin or Trotsky, or even outside of Stalin and Trotsky. We got like people name all kinds of motherfuckers. People name like Tito from Yugoslavia, all kinds of people really have never heard of, mostly Europeans, right? And you got to ask yourself, okay, you pick a tendency, you pick a side, so what? Now what? Right? Now, how does that apply to our people today? How does that apply to our political prisoners? How does that apply to people who are homeless? How does that apply to people who still need food? Right? It doesn't. And that's why you don't see, you never saw Chavez or Maduro go out there and say, I'm a stop. Don't forget, we always got to have a picture of Stalin right next to a picture of Bolivar. They never did that because that wasn't directly applicable to the conditions that they were struggling with at the time. And so that's really where we're coming from, I think, in this discussion. And that's where I'm coming from. I got my bias, but even with my bias towards Stalin, I recognize, look, Stalin doesn't have the answers for me today. He has some important contributions, and even so does Trotsky. Trotsky did some things during the Civil War where he helped lead parts of the Red Army to fight for the Soviet Union. And whatever he did after that, I would consider treasonous, but that doesn't really, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter. That shit happened 100 years ago, and it has no effect on the conditions that exist today. Why aren't we studying people like, George Jackson, who just passed away, or who the anniversary of his death was just the other day? Why aren't we studying people like Emiliano Zapata, who had a land redistribution program and was redistributing land before the Bolsheviks had even had their revolution, right? Why not talk about our own revolutionary heroes who have direct contributions back to our people? That's really where I see us coming from.
And I'm right there with you, brother. And so that's always my big critique of that. Like I'm not going to claim do I have a particular bias? I lean slightly more towards stop, but again, that it doesn't. I don't try to win over my people by saying, right, hey, by the way, like, no, that's not, I've never done that. Right. I've never done that. I've done it through culture. I've done it through reading other things. I've done it through saying, hey, have you studied the Cuban Revolution and its relevancy to the 60s, and because the 60s get romanticized a lot, right? So that's something that you can use to try to win people over. But to get into these ideological discussions into these ideological discussions and debates about Stalin versus Trotsky, that's not where it's at for our people, you know. And I think it's dangerous. It's in the sense that you want to talk about divisive, which we've been called before. That's divisive. Because what's happening to our Latino folks, they're falling into these camps, and now you're pitting one Latino communist against another Latino communist. Why would and in Latin America, are these even relevant discussions? This is not this. I'm not saying it doesn't exist in certain, and you have Maoist tendencies. We could point to the shining path, but I mean, where do you have maybe in certain academic circles, maybe, but like this is not a thing in Latin America, and it shouldn't be a thing here for our people here in the diaspora here. It's not. It's counterintuitive, really, when you think about it. It doesn't advance our struggle. If anything, it divides us and splinters us.
I think that's important too. It's divisive, but for what purpose? Right? Because look, people use the word divisive sometimes, I think, to like just speak negatively, to make it like a negative connotation or something. But sometimes you need to be divisive. Sometimes you need to split off from people who are doing things that are wrong, or maybe steering the party or steering the ideology down a wrong path. But right now we're talking about divisions, which today have materialized, have really mean nothing. And let me give you an example. The Workers' World Party here in the United States calls itself Trotskyist, right? The PSL and probably the CPUSA consider themselves Leninist and follow Stalin's line of thinking. Both of them agree that the U.S. should lift the blockade off of Cuba, and both of them support, the Cuban Revolution and the Cuban government. What the hell does the difference between Stalinism and Trotskyism make? Like, what material difference in their line of thinking does the Stalinism and Trotskyism create in terms of like actually practical support and international solidarity with Cuba? It makes no difference. They're both doing the same thing, but they're in different camps. Why? Because they choose to be, right? And it's exactly like what you were saying. It's divisive for no reason, right? And that's what we've seen. We've seen people divide themselves up, fighting over these things, and it's like, leave that. Like what are you, like a historian? Are you an academic? Like, are you what are you hoping to get out of this? Because most people, first of all, most people don't even know who the hell you're talking about, and then on top of that, most people don't even care. Right, because it was like people are gonna say, "Well, that was 100 years ago," and not only that, it was 100 years ago in another country that doesn't even apply to me. So, like you said, we convinced people with the Cuban Revolution, right? We convinced people with a lot of people like Salvador Allende. We convinced people with our heroes, right? Whenever I do the food distributions here in North, we one of the organizations I work with, the Black Men United, they have posters and stuff, and like the pictures of Huey Newton and Malcolm X, and people in the community can recognize those figures, right? If we brought pictures of Engels and fucking like Lenin, like, they respect those people too, but people in the community be like, who the fuck are these guys? They wouldn't know who we're talking about. So, we gotta make the ideology, we gotta make our theoretical actions actually fit into the community and the material world that we're living in right now. Yeah, you can go ahead.
No, I'm just gonna say it's really when you think about it, it's the white left leadership pumping their chest, saying, "No, I have the correct ideological line. I'm more revolutionary than you."
Right.
And then again, talking about our people fall into that, and again, there's that. I'm gonna keep saying this. There's that void. This is partly our fault. And I say our, I mean Latinos in the Latinos and Latinas. Until we create our own revolutionary party, Marxist-Leninist party, we're going to keep falling into this stuff. And so I don't really blame our people for wanting to go into a political party, because you want to be able to further advance your theory. And where do you go? You go into one of these white leftist, political parties because we don't have something for ourselves. And so, but then when you really get caught up in that, then you start pitting yourself against, so if you're a Stalinist, then you can't shake hands, or you have these differences with someone from a different political party, right? Trotskyite party. And it's silly. It's really silly. If we were to ever be successful in forming a political party for ourselves, I would have no problem saying, hey, this is going to be a Marxist Leninist Fidelista party, right? And I consider myself, I've always said I'm a Fidelista, I have no problem saying that. I will never say yo soy Stalinista, yo soy Troquita. I'm never going to say that. I will read both. I will study both. I would be critical of both. Again, I have maybe a little bit of bias and leaning towards one over the other, but I would never call myself, me personally, I would never call myself a Stalinist or Troquita. I'm never going to do that. Fidelista, sí, all day, every day,
And my thing too, it's funny that you mentioned like being a Fidelista, because I think of how many people I've seen say they claim they identify as a Guevarist, right? Oh, I follow Che Guevara. So basically the Stalin and Trotsky thing would be like, well, okay, you say you're a Fidelista. I say, no, I believe in Guevara. So Che was right about everything, and you're Fidelista. You're wrong. I can't even work with you. That would be ridiculous, right? To think that our people would start doing that and dividing ourselves into camps like that would be ridiculous, right? And that's something that we can't do. We can't afford to do, because that makes us weaker in the movement, right? But that's what these organizations are essentially doing. They're taking individuals who, long gone, who had a significant influence, no doubt, and they're dividing themselves based off of these two individuals. They're creating a cult of personality around the dead, and it's kind of ridiculous. But at least with the Fidelista, for our people, that makes more sense, right? Because people know who that is.
That was a successful revolution that happened for our people. That is the vanguard to this day. They're still in power.
Right. And people respect that. And people know that name too, right? People are going to know who Fidel Castro is. People aren't going to know who Stalin is or Trotsky is. Like, that's just the reality of it. No matter how much you might not like that, that's just how it is.
So the part that, and I want to shout out our comrade Carlos Cruz Mosquera, who always, every opportunity he gets, will bring up Mariátegui, and and he says, we can't create something along the lines of the line that he always uses from Mariátegui, that it's not going to be a carbon copy of whatever the Europeans created. It's going to be a heroic creation, right? He always mentions that, right? The heroic creation, as it and applying Marxism to our material conditions today. Well, at the end, what Professor Juan Gomez says was just so important. I think it's so relevant. When he says, in the actual world, you have many sectors or classes that don't necessarily fit any of those categories. Talking about the third world, right, and the global south. So in those categories, when we're talking about those categories, the bourgeoisie, laborers, and farmers. And you have classes that have transformed themselves in many different aspects, and you have to consider them or take them into account in order to produce the changes you want to see in today's world. So again, it's really, really important to be able to adapt what to today's reality. And I think that what you're seeing, the Latin American revolution that you're seeing today, I think that the left has been very apt at doing that, very skillful and apt and efficient in doing that. Yeah. And so that's what we need in the diaspora. If anything, we need to do the same. And this, again, these ideological debates, and you're seeing them all over social media too. Like, people really get caught up in this, and it's people start parroting it, and then it's this whole thing. It's this online tension that's been created, and our people are falling into that. And it's like, it's not, what is that actually doing for our people?
Right.
It's not doing anything for it. Like, there's nothing where there's no gain from it. There's no benefit. I asked the question to Professor Juan Gomez. That was his response. It was a thoughtful response. It's like, no, we're not engaging in that. And in Latin America, they don't engage in that.
Right. And I think too, what's interesting about Mariátegui, and I think even now, I don't mean to speak for Carlos, but I believe just in my talking with him, just like us, he has more of a bias towards Stalin. But even then, I don't think it's that much of a big deal with him. But what's interesting about Mariátegui is he was a fan of Trotsky's. He was more leaning towards Trotsky. So if we were to take this sort of thinking, this divisive thinking from the much of the U.S. and the Western left, we would dismiss Mariátegui outright. We would say, well, we can't follow him because he deviated towards Trotskyism and not towards our kind of Leninism. And that's, even though he wasn't a Trotskyist, so to speak, he had his own socialist ideology. People, oftentimes dismiss each other outright. And I liked what you said, Victor, earlier about if we were in a party and we had people, and it was like a Latin American party, and we had people of all different tendencies joining, it's okay if they have different tendencies. It's okay if they think, they follow this person more than this person. What I would be more concerned about is what kind of work are you doing? What's the practice, right? If, forget about your ideology. Like, you could be a damn anarchist, right? And this is kind of what gets me upset sometimes is I know people who are anarchists who do pretty good work, right? Who actually are pretty active in organizing. I may disagree with them about, hierarchies and all that kind of stuff. And I might see a different vision, but they're still doing good work. There's no reason why we can't work together, right? In solidarity to some extent. But a lot of people are trying to teach our people that you should just dismiss people outright solely based on, some different left-wing ideology they have. Now, I get it. You want to dismiss people outright who are right-wing, fascist, conservative, racist, whatever. Like, that makes sense to me. Okay, you don't have to put up with that. But we're talking about people who are on our side, right? Like our brothers and sisters, people who look like us, who are actually care about their communities too, but might have a slightly different way of going about it or a slightly way of thinking. It doesn't matter. Like the thinking, the tendencies, that doesn't matter. What matters is what work are they doing? What are they actually putting in? And how does, maybe their ideology influences how they act and what kind of practices they partake in. But as long as those practices are still good and beneficial to the community, as long as they're still about building power, these things shouldn't be that divisive.
Absolutely. I do want to address, so the obviously we were having a little fun with the title. You couldn't tell, and the image as well. And by the way, we don't mean any disrespect for using a caricatura, which we did. We took an iconic image and sort of made light of the whole. So for the Carpinchista part, so let's explain that. So if folks haven't been following, there's a certain place in a certain region in Argentina where some highfalutin Argentinians moved in. I think, what was it, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever it was.
Yeah, a couple decades.
Yeah. So and native to that, the capicabras are
capybara. I don't pronounce it exactly right in English, but like capybara or something like that.
Yeah, they're native. So it's a rodent. It's like a 3-foot rodent that could weigh up to 175 pounds. They're native to that land. So basically, you had these Argentinian settlers who just came in and invaded. And so it's become a news story, because they're known colloquially, I guess, as Carpinchos, right? And so it became a news story. You can look it up on YouTube and stuff like that. I wasn't even aware of these rodents existed. I never even heard of this until I heard this. I saw the story. And so, you have, a lot of folks on the left have sort of been having fun with it and saying we're in solidarity with the Carpinchos, but that's where the whole title, came up with. That's how we came up with the title and stuff, just to have a little fun with it and make light of the situation. But yeah, I don't know if you had anything else to add to that.
Nah, I mean, yeah, to be honest, I didn't really know much about the Carpincho story until it was brought up to us. Like, I don't know when we started talking about it, like a week ago, but now it was pretty funny. But I think the one thing I wanted to talk about, going back to the conversation, was I think one of the things that we also want to mention is we're not saying not to engage or not to read. like certain thinkers or certain tendencies or certain ideologies, wherever they may be, I think it's always important to like read and study and know, know who's who and know what they say, what they believe in. But at the same time, don't get so caught up and hung up on these thinkers from hundreds of years ago, whose conditions that they were writing in, whose the context that they were living in were just so vastly different from the ones that we live in today. And if you do wanna really like make those connections, or you want to bring in that kind of reading and make those links, then you got to be very specific about it. You got to say, look, this was written 100 years ago, and this is the conditions now. This was the conditions then. This is how they're similar. This is how it applies. You got to be really specific about it. We don't see people doing that, right? What we're talking about is we're seeing people read, these theorists from 80, 90, 100 years ago, and then just debate have the same debates that they were having 100 years ago, and just keep repeating that shit without applying it to what's going on today.
Right.
And, we need to work on that, right? Because that's not getting us anywhere.
On my bookshelf, I have both Stalin and Trotsky. Like, I'm not going to not buy a book because it was written by Stalin or because it was written by Trotsky. That's not happening. I'm buying both, right? Like I'm trying to develop my library where I have both, and I have Marx and I have Lenin and I have Fidel. I mean, it's exactly what the professor said. He said we nourish ourselves with socialist ideology, right? Or something along those lines. So we will read all of that stuff. We're Marxist Leninists. That's what we are. And we will nourish ourselves with any profound thinker that's putting out socialist ideology. And I think that's an easy, good position. Like, I don't think that's the bit. Like, okay, all these parties are Marxist Leninists, right? That have these ideological debates, but you want to throw that extra thing in there at the end. It's not necessary. It's not necessary. Fidel Castro once said, I am a Marxist Leninist and I will be one for the rest of my life. That's it. He didn't say I was a Stalinist. He didn't say I was a Trotskyite. He didn't say any of those. He said I'm a Marxist Leninist. Period.
And two, just think about, like, it just ran through my mind. Like, you got a lot of people who, especially even our people, more people who will talk about Stalinism, who will talk about Trotskyism, but don't even know what antionismo is, right? Which is, the unity, an idea coming from multiple Caribbean thinkers like Betances, Caribbean revolutionaries, who were saying that we need to have a confederation of the Antilles, right? A confederation of republics, Spanish-speaking and English-speaking, who are going to fight against colonialism, Spanish colonialism, U.S. colonialism, right? And so imagine bringing back that idea of antionismo in a day and age where we have to fight against U.S. imperialism, not just in Cuba, but also in Haiti, in the DR, and in Puerto Rico, right? Imagine a unified Caribbean Antilles, which is what they were talking about, back in the 1800s. You have more people who look like us, who are in these white organizations, who'll talk about Stalinism or Trotskyism all day, but they will never talk about antionismo because they were never taught it. They never learned it.
Which is insane. It's insane.
Right.
It's insane. Well, anyways, I think that was a good discussion. I hope folks enjoyed it. I don't know. Do you have any other closing thoughts on that? I mean, I think we pretty much hit it there, but hit it out the park there. But anything else?
Nah, I mean that was it really. It's just I think we were saying, it's a lot of effort and time put into these arguments and these debates, but they don't reflect our communities, right? They don't reflect our needs and our struggles.
I'm gonna read something that you hit me with earlier today. I thought this was great. We need an ideology that pertains to our communities and struggles, that speaks to what we are fighting for today. And I think that just sort of captures, the essence and spirit of what we're trying to, articulate to the public. It's we don't we don't need to get into these ideological debates about Stalin versus Trot. Especially when let's go back to the question of power. Right? What power? We have no power. We have zero power in this country. And this is what our people are getting caught up in. And then you look at Latin America, it's the opposite paradigm, the opposite model, right? They're not having these debates. They're getting to action.
Right.
They're getting to action. They're voting for socialism. They've been dying for socialism. They've been fighting for socialism with arms. And now they're voting for socialism. And so they're moving and marching towards socialism without these stupid, I don't say stupid, but they're these really insignificant. I'm going to say they're insignificant debates because they don't further advance. We can't even figure out how to collectively how to organize and get some power for our people. But we want to sit in a room somewhere or be online somewhere and debate each other about Stalin versus Trotsky. Just let everything you need to know about our quote unquote movement here, the so-called left in the United States, that it's summed up right there.
And two, I just want to add real quick. One of the things I just remembered I mentioned to you when I sent that message was look, and I'll say this to the audience: look at how many of these parties who identify either with like Stalin or like not Lenin, but Stalinism or Trotskyism, or who are like bent are really invested in this argument. How many of these parties or organizations or individuals are talking about Sundiata Acoli? Who's and it's interesting. I guess it applies more to us, Vic, because we're from Jersey, and a lot of this is like kind of like Jersey history from the 70s in terms of the Black Power movement. But he was he was arrested alongside in the New Jersey shooting, a New Jersey Turnpike shooting of a state trooper, and he was one of those with Assata Shakur. He was arrested for the shooting, and he's been a political prisoner for over 50 years now. And, it's just now that they're considering paroling Sundiata. So they would release him, with some regulation, some limitations. But how many folks who are invested in this Stalinist and this Trotskyist and this anarchist and all of these debates, how many of them are really even talking about this political prisoner, right? Who has such a great impact, who has such a profound impact on our communities, from the Black Liberation Army, right? Who almost no one even mentions today. How many of these parties are educating their rank and file members about this? How many of these parties are educating the communities that they claim to organize in about this, right? No, almost none of them are. The reality is that almost none of them are. And it's because they've wasted all this time on these frivolous and just useless and stupid arguments about shit that happened 100 years ago. And this wasn't 100 years ago. This was 50 years ago that this shooting happened. And he's been in jail since for 50 years now, since last year, since this year, right? Dealing with all kinds of medical ailments. So, we need to get our priorities straight in terms of what we're focused on and with our organizing efforts, right? Sundiata and all political prisoners should absolutely be one of the number one priorities for every organizing party or every party that organizes here in the United States.
Right on. And it's again, it just when you're able to just kind of sort of sit back and reflect, it says a lot about the so-called movement, here in the United States. It says a lot when we can't figure out some of these other issues that are really important to us. I highlight some of these issues, but we should really be important to our communities. But it also said, look, this is, and again, I go back to what I've been saying about the void. These organizations are led by a lot of white folks. And so when you have organizations led by white folks, these political parties led by white folks, you're going to have white tendencies, right? You've brought it up before about political prisoners, white political prisoners versus the Black and brown and red indigenous political prisoners, and which one gets more play in the audience in social media and gets highlighted in overall media. And that's not to say we shouldn't fight for those white brothers who've risked themselves to advance the cause. But there's a huge disparity in terms of coverage and the highlighting of these cases and these causes. It's just it's. I mean, that's not debatable. You can't debate that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know. All right, so we'll leave it there. It's we're 40 minutes into it, so let's get into some of the headlines here. Let's go to Mexico, Central America, and Caribbean region. Starting off with Nicaragua, as we usually start off with. Been starting off with lately. 8 opposition leaders have been charged with conspiracy to undermine national integrity, and presidential elections are taking place in November, and so. Again, I'm highlighting this every single week because you're seeing this just continue to play out in the media. Again, I encourage folks to check, if you haven't checked out the interview we did with the Sandinista cadre from a few weeks ago. Carlos Chamorro of the dynastic Chamorro family is being charged with crimes of money, property, and asset laundering. Several members of the Chamorro family are being accused of varying crimes. And again, just a friendly reminder, the Chamorro family is a right-wing family that has produced 6 different Nicaraguan presidents.
Right. Real quick, I think that's so important. Like, these are the types of people who are getting arrested in Nicaragua right now. These are the types of people who are being persecuted. And you have, you basically have the U.S. Western media doing like a cover up or the opposite of a character assassination. They're building up the characters of these right-wing dictators, right-wing dictators or families who have spawned, all kinds of countless dictators, paramilitaries, narco dictators, all of these, like the worst, most violent fascists and authoritarians in Nicaragua and really throughout Latin America. These are the types of people who are being attacked right now in Nicaragua, and these are the types of people who Western media is defending. And it's crazy, to me because still you have people, some folks who are not right wing, who are left or consider themselves left, who are critical of Ortega for making these arrests, right? But you got to understand the history. You got to understand who are the people he's arresting. It's people who have a history of committing crimes against the people.
Yeah, I would say those people are not hardcore revolutionaries. I mean, this is a question of power. The Sandinistas are not going to go back. They saw what happened when they were taken out of power, this is a question of power. I see these things as a positive, because again, as revolutionaries, we have to be very clear that this is a question and a matter of power. And the Sandinista, the Nicaraguan people are seeing the fruits and benefits of this type of leadership. So why do we want to go back? And those people are hell-bent. Those people who are being arrested are hell-bent on taking Nicaragua backwards. That's so let's analyze that side. So just playing devil's advocate, if you're on that side, if you're part of the Chamorro family or network, why do you want to be in power? So you can bring back capitalism, so you can become rich, so you become wealthy, so you can go after indigenous people, so you can go after the communists, so you can do away with, so you can privatize healthcare and privatize education, and not worry about building roads or bridges, or making sure that you have sustainable agriculture and food sovereignty. That's why you want to be in power. So again, this is not rocket science. This is not rocket science. The Sandinistas are building a society, are creating a society where they're thinking about everyone, right? Specifically, the historically oppressed, the indigenous, women, the farmers, the workers, right? That's who they're focused on, right? And so, yeah, Ortega and the Sandinistas, they're not fucking around in Nicaragua. They're going to make sure that they're going to stay in power, period. Moving on to Cuba. Cuba will begin using China's Sinopharm vaccine. The World Health Organization gave emergency approval to this vaccine in May. And this is a production issue, obviously, in Cuba, because Cuba has two very effective homemade vaccines, but cannot manufacture enough of it due to the embargo. And so Cuba is partnering with communist ally China to bring this new vaccine into Cuba to help vaccinate the entire population. The next piece of news coming out of Cuba is very fascinating, is interesting to me. I have my own take on it. Cuba is introducing cryptocurrency to the island. Several news outlets have reported that Cuba will authorize and regulate the use of cryptocurrency, including Bitcoin. Cryptocurrency was already being used in the black market. This move allows the government to track and regulate its use. Here's my take on it. It's because of the blockade, because of the sanctions, and because of the nonstop attacks against Cuba. Obviously, Cuba's trying to figure out a way to sort of maneuver. Really, obviously trying to circumvent the blockade and the sanctions, but also like, how do you create reforms within the country, considering you have a blockade against you and all these sanctions, where you don't lose the core principles of socialism, but you're sort of like playing this game, if you will, of trying to make sure that you've made this point before, Nick. The Cuban people want more stuff. They want to be able to just produce more stuff and want more stuff. So we're materialists, right? As communists, we're materialists. So we want the Cuban people and the Cuban economy to be successful, right? And they think that this is just a way to be able to, circumvent the financial systems, the global financial systems, to get more money, and more hard. Again, this is a different type of currency. So I was going to say hard cash, but digital currency. Into the hands of average Cubans, so they can buy more stuff, so they can get more stuff.
Yeah. I'm curious. So, are they going to get the is it cryptocurrency for the average Cuban, or is it just something that the government's going to be using? Like
no.
Central bank?
This is the average Cuban is going to be able to use cryptocurrency. It's going to, obviously, the government's trying to figure out ways how to regulate it. That's the biggest thing. It's how to regulate this thing. I don't have any, there's not much news about because I even went to Cuba's website and stuff, the grandma, and I went to some other really good sources, and I just couldn't find much information about this, other than they've made Cuba's central bank has made this announcement.
Right. Yeah, because I was gonna say, so Venezuela did something similar a few years back. I'm not sure, it was maybe like a 2017. It was a while back. So their whole thing in Venezuela was, I think first they even thought about making their own cryptocurrency, and then alongside that they also they had the central bank to accept cryptocurrency payments, or accept the transaction of cryptocurrencies. Including Bitcoin, which I'm not sure where it was originated from, if it's US or somewhere else, but it doesn't matter. But so this is a move, I think, by a lot of socialist nations like Venezuela, like Cuba, to like you said, to circumvent the sanctions and embargo. And I think to some extent it has been somewhat successful for Venezuela, and I imagine it'll be the same for Cuba. I only ask about the average person because I can't imagine that the average Cuban would be able to even have access to Bitcoin or any cryptocurrency, because cryptocurrency is usually a very unstable market. It's not tied down to anything. The prices fluctuate. We kind of talked about this, I think, when we talked about cryptocurrency in El Salvador. Right. And I think it's important because a lot of people are now making that comparison, El Salvador and Cuba. I saw an article that was like, these two nations are now embracing cryptocurrency as their currency. And that's not exactly true, right? In El Salvador, I would say the purpose of cryptocurrency is probably more so for the elite, for the president himself, for for the corrupt politicians who support him, for them to circumnavigate any kind of laws, international or domestic, which could tie them back to any kind of crimes. For the average Salvadorian, again, we talked about this, they're probably not going to have access or interactions with cryptocurrency because it's too out there, right? For the Cubans, right, it's a whole other story. The thing with the Cubans is they're not, engaged in the illegal activities as most capitalist, narco dictators are. They are, for Cuba and Venezuela, they themselves are criminalized, right? They are criminalized just in their being, right? So, and that's because of the sanctions and because of the blockade. So they have no choice but to engage in using cryptocurrency in order to try to circumnavigate this. So I think it makes sense if how effective it's going to be. I guess I hope that it's as effective as it could be. Like it really works, but who knows? With Venezuela, it helped alleviate some things, but they still have a lot of economic issues due to the sanctions. But hopefully, at least for Cuba, it might work a little better. But who knows? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah, I have 3 points about cryptocurrency. Well, 3 points just in general, but about cryptocurrency, and then specifically in El Salvador and Cuba. My first point is I think so. Cryptocurrency, and I'm not a finance guy. I'm not an economist, but I think it's a fast-moving train that it's just not, you can't stop this right now. It's just, the more you read about it, the more people are buying into it. And remember that at the end of the day, money has if I pass you over, if I give you $100 bill, what that $100 bill represents, so, and you know what you can do with it, what you can't do with it. So money has value because people give it value. Otherwise, I just handed you over a piece of green paper that says $100, 100 on it, right? With cryptocurrency, the more people buy into it, and by the way, I'm not advocating. I'm not taking a position either way. I don't want people to interpret and say, well, Victor's for cryptocurrency. I don't know whether I'm for it or against it. I'm just saying that right now, people are buying into this thing globally. So when I say it's a fast moving train, you have athletes who are signing contracts who say, I want part of my deal to include some sort of cryptocurrency. You have nations like Cuba now, and you mentioned Venezuela and El Salvador embracing cryptocurrency. And other nations all over the world, right? So it's just, I don't know what to make of it. I just know that it's a thing, and I think people need to just pay attention to it. Again, I'm not advocating for or against it or anything like that. I'm just saying that's my first observation about that. Point number 2, we'll tie into point number 3, which is that, Cuba's response, or not response, but Cuba's announcement of this, without saying anything else, is very typical of Cuba. They're taking a measured, methodical approach. They're going to be extremely careful about this. This thing is going to be heavily regulated, because the Cubans are social scientists. They're gonna be methodical. They are going to take their time, and thoroughly think about all the consequences about what this means to their economy, as opposed to now point number 3. Where in El Salvador, the president, Nayib, I'm not sure if you pronounce it Bukele or Bukele. I think it's Bukele. I've heard it pronounced either way. Nayib Bukele, he started fast tracking this stuff and said a whole bunch of nothing and just confused an entire nation. Right? It's just a completely different approach. This is the same guy who says, I don't have an ideology, who's some weird maverick who likes to take a bunch of selfies and just says a lot of nothing. So it is different than what you're seeing in El Salvador. They just made an announcement. That's all they did right now. They just made an announcement. I'd be curious to see how this develops in Cuba. But again, knowing the Cubans, they'll probably take a very slow, methodical, practical approach to this issue.
Right. And what would be interesting to find out too, what Cubans are using cryptocurrency right now, like or what Cubans were using cryptocurrency before it was like accepted by
black market. It was a lot of black market stuff.
Like and I'm curious, like who in the black market are we talking about? Like cartels moving through Cuba? Are we talking about media, like right-wing media being funded by the U.S.? Who is if
Now in Cuba, listen, in Cuba, I've spoken to a lot of people who visited Cuba. Like when I say black market, there's a joke. There's a running joke in Cuba that says pretty much like everybody's in the black market in Cuba because let's just be real. Let's be real about the topic. There's what the state provides you, and whatnot, and then there's people who out there who got to hustle, got to get that second hustle in, So I don't think, cartels in Cuba, what the CIA talk, I don't think none of that exists in Cuba. I think you're talking about really, just the average Cuban who's just trying to make it, and so they gotta figure out a side hustle. The government knows this happens. Some people who really take, who really take advantage of, let's say, of the black market and get the get the attentions of the authorities. You gotta some Cubans got to be careful with that because they do some, it's all illegal, right? So if you start, if all of a sudden they start seeing capitalist activity increase, in Cuba, you might get caught up in some shit out there. But yeah, I just think people who are out there just doing a side hustle or whatever, just trying to make ends meet, because like, again, let's be real about the conditions in Cuba. Like it's fucked up, right? And it's not, and I don't blame that on socialism at all. I don't think it has anything to do with socialism. I think it has everything to do with the blockade and nothing to do with socialism. This idea that you're going to blame socialism for their economic conditions, it's ridiculous.
Right. But my thing though is this, so from my experience in Cuba, right? There were people hustling. I know exactly what you're talking about. Look, they got Wi-Fi parks, right, in Cuba. So they got parks where you got to go, and that's the only spot where you can really access a good, secure, stable Wi-Fi connection. While you're there, you got to buy if you go there and you're a foreigner or a tourist, or even if you're from the island, you got to buy a Wi-Fi card. If you're from the island, you're a citizen, I think the government usually gives you one of these. But if you're a foreigner, you got to buy like a prepaid card, and it gives you a certain amount of access to the Wi-Fi for a certain amount of time. We made friends on our trip. We made friends with the guys who were at the park who were selling like these bootleg, shitty little copies of Wi-Fi cards. Some of them worked, some of them didn't. This dude was making them right out of his house. It was literally across the street. We got to, right. So he showed us. But my thing with that is there's not, like, at least when we were talking with the guy and we were looking at his prices, like it didn't seem like they were so high that you needed to like start paying with cryptocurrency. So that's why I was curious. And in terms of like the cartels and things, like there is a drug trade in Cuba. I'll say that. I'll say that just because, like, from the people we were talking to, they laid it out for us how it worked. But there is a drug trade in Cuba. So I'm not sure if it's not nearly on the same level as like Colombia or Honduras or any other country, but there is a little bit of something. And that's why I was curious too. Like, is it the drug? Is it because Cuba is a lot more strict in terms of the drug trade? They're really cracked down, which is why there aren't
they don't fuck around with that.
Right. And there's no huge cartels like you'll see in all these other countries in Latin America. But there is still some trade there. They got to get through Cuba in order to get to places like Florida and go into the rest of the U.S. So I'm curious if it's them that's maybe trying to been using the cryptocurrency and black market, or is it people who are being funded by the U.S. and they're trying to cover that up by using cryptocurrency. Right, I don't know. It's just something I've been thinking.
And so listen, if you're thinking about this, I'm sure that the Cubans are thinking, the Cubans authorities are thinking about it. So yeah, I mean, I expect them to proceed with caution, and there's going to be a bunch of measures. That's my expectation. I mean, they're not going to, again, I admire the Cuban state for, being, it's 2021, they got a blockade against them, and they're trying to figure out different ways to make, to essentially circumvent this damn blockade and get creative with their economy, because they know that their people are suffering, so, Che talked about creating the new man, right? And you want everybody's buy-in, right? And, everything for the revolution, and you want people to feel that way. You want everybody to be like Chet and to be out there and bust their ass and build a nation. They've been doing this shit since 1959, and the United States just won't let up, and the economy is where it's at. even the most hardcore revolutionary in Cuba, you know, is probably feeling a certain type of way. You know what I mean? Like, and that's not to say that you stop. You know, again, the Cuba, they're in good hands. I've always said this. You know, they've trained millions of revolutionaries there in Cuba, so they're in good hands. But I get it. You know, I get it. It's like, it's just stifling. You know, so you know, you're in Cuba, you got to figure this shit out. You know, you got to block. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. If anything, again, the Biden administration is ratcheting shit up. So they're trying to get creative. They have to do different things without losing the principles, right?
Right.
So continuing on, let's go to Mexico. Immigration news. The U.S. is demanding Mexico eliminate migrant camps in border cities. Two of the biggest camps are in Reynosa, which borders McAllen, Texas, and Tijuana, which borders San Diego, California. On Tuesday, the U.S. Supreme Court ordered the Biden administration to comply with the prior Trump immigration policy, which forces asylum seekers in the thousands to stay in Mexico to await U.S. hearings. Moving on to Venezuela, the Venezuelan government, represented by Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, provided the ICC, or the International Criminal Court, with evidence of the damage caused by U.S. sanctions. And this is not the first time they're going to the ICC. This is now the second time, I believe. I believe they went last year in February 2020, if my memory serves me correct. And there have been even internal U.S. documents have also shown the same. The CEPR, I'm blanking on the. You can look them up. It's a group. It's essentially a think tank of American economists. Have also put out reports showing the impact of the sanctions against Venezuela. But yeah. So I'm not sure if you had any thoughts on that before we move on to Brazil.
On the Venezuelan thing, no. I mean, I just think back to the what was it, that report that they put out? What was it, in 2019 or 2018? The 40,000 killed just in that 1 year from sanctions alone, which is crazy, right?
Sanctions kill.
Right. And so it's insane. It's just how much damage that. And but understand that wasn't like unintentional death. That was intentional. That was the whole point of the sanction. But yeah, and real quick too on the Mexican immigration issue.
Yeah.
I think right now in the U.S., one of the biggest issues right now is the immigration, because that's the issue that if you turn on Fox News, I guarantee you at least 5 times a day you'll hear on different programs they'll talk about immigration. And I've been trying to keep up and watch with all the stuff that they've been saying. It's just all fear mongering propaganda. You know, people in the South are being invaded. People are. It's like it's ramped up to such a like racist and white supremacist degree. It's very I don't know. It seems very intense. Only because this is the exact type of thinking that has led to mass violence against Latinos in the past. So,
and where are Latino leaders on this? Because it's clearly an attack on Latinos,
right?
You know, and it doesn't stop, and it's been like this nonstop for 20 years. But now our people are being used as fodder. You know, they're being used, and if you know, again, this issue of immigration gets politicized without any context. So our people are being used as cannon fodder, and it's just so you can have one party fight against another party on what to do with our people.
Mm-hmm. And they're both doing the same thing.
They're both doing the same thing.
At the end of the day.
Right.
It's crazy.
Right. It's great. Yeah. It's again, it's that the twin party system where one is taking an extreme right position, a xenophobic, white supremacist position in rhetoric and form, and then the Democrats in rhetoric want to act and pretend like they're our friend and they're going to help us, but in form they do the same thing.
Right.
You know. Moving on to Brazil, the gift that keeps on giving. President Jair Bolsonaro. So thousands of indigenous people are protesting Brazil's Supreme Court, which is set to issue a ruling on basically on ancestral land. Of course, President Jair Bolsonaro is taking an anti-indigenous position. He even had his attorney general request the courts to seek an end to stop indigenous people from gathering outside the courthouse. A judge denied the request. and they even used the pretexto de que, you know, that of COVID. This is the Bolsonaro administration using the COVID pretext from having people to stop. This is the guy who's been a COVID denier, anti-science, had basically did like a mini Trump, a baby Trump, where he did not want to do anything, and people died. You know, they have the most casualties besides us on the entire hemisphere.
Right.
President Bolsonaro's once again creating drama for next year's elections, publicly stating that I have three alternatives for my future: being arrested, killed, or victory. So he's painting this very apocalyptic scenario, again undermining the electoral process by stating that, again, he's either going to be arrested, killed, or he's going to have a victory. And I'm gonna couple that headline with the following headline, with following two headlines, more Bolsonaro news headlines, where he recently stated that everyone should have a rifle. Now that's the headline, and literally when you read the news outlets on it, it's just a couple blurbs. But again, he's painting this very apocalyptic, almost, you know, civil war type thing happening between, you know, the left and the right. And then lastly, 25 of 27 governors, Brazilian governors, have signed on to a document to express their concern over the overwhelming support of military police for the president. So there was some sort of demonstration, and you saw a lot of military police in support of the president. And so none of this is painting a good picture for next year. You've brought up, Nick, how Bannon, the former advisor to President Trump, or candidate, I guess, Trump, before he became president, is in Brazil, showing support for Bolsonaro, and a lot of right-wing elements of the U.S. are in Brazil, sort of helping Bolsonaro, you know, over the next year to make sure he gets reelected to Brazil, to the highest office in Brazil.
Right, and I think we talked about it like 2-3 weeks ago. Bannon said Lula is the most dangerous person on the left, and that these next upcoming presidential elections in Brazil will be one of the most important elections in Latin America. You know what? I mean, we can just keep saying what we've been saying. This man is he glorifies the 1950s military dictatorship in Brazil, and he wants to do that again. I'm not sure. I really haven't looked into it too much, how much support he has from the military, not just the military police, but you know, like the actual like armed forces of Brazil. Because from what I've seen, at least more recently, he's lost in terms of like public support and even support from other politicians, even on the right. He's lost a bunch. Like he's isolated himself, right? He really is a lot like Trump, where he kind of says and does stupid ass shit, and he isolates himself politically and just generally within the public. And now he has to do things where, like you said, kind of he's beating the war drums, right? The drums to civil war. He's telling, when he says to go buy a gun, who is he talking to? He's talking to his supporters. You know, and now the danger is you might have a situation like you had in Colombia, where you had rich communities take up arms. You know, these people weren't in the military, they weren't in the police, but they were taking up arms against the national protesters and the national strikers, and they were shooting at and attacking national strikers in Colombia, right? And now Bolsonaro was basically telling his supporters, buy a rifle because you're going to be needing to do the same thing come a year or so from now, right? So it's, you know, like you said, he's beating the drums of war for this civil war. You know, two of those options, I would say two of those three options, I would be okay with. But you know, he really, what is he really saying? If he doesn't win, he's gonna cause a bloodbath, and he doesn't care. Like it's crazy to me, just the utter lack of concern for human life that these people have. Like how disgusting and evil these individuals.
He's a maniac. He's a maniac. He's a psycho. Yeah. So, by the way, and you know, just in case if you're tuning in for the first time or don't know much about Brazil, he was brought. He's brought to you by the ruling capitalist class in Brazil, who could not beat Lula's political party, Lula da Silva, who again, while we have our criticisms of him, he was a progressive, quote unquote, leftist president, and so they couldn't beat him and his political party at the polls. So they used lawfare to get rid of him, and then to get rid of his successor, Dilma Rousseff, who was a former Marxist guerrilla herself and a trained economist. And so they got rid of those two individuals, even though they were both, let's just say, well, Dilma was, she was democratically elected. Lula, was absolved and exonerated, right, of all the quote unquote crimes that he committed. So the ruling capitalist class cannot rationally deal with Lula and his political party, which was a tremendous force. And again, he's leading in polls again, because there's going to be an election next year, and it's probably going to be Lula versus Bolsonaro, and he's leading again in the polls. So this is probably driving the ruling capitalist class crazy, but Bolsonaro's also driving them crazy, right? He's become a liability, much like Trump became a liability to the capitalist ruling class here in the United States. So that's what's essentially what you have, in Brazil. And yeah, we just have to keep an eye on this. This is why we're reporting this stuff every week, just so folks become aware, because Brazil is very important strategically in the region. It's a huge economy. Besides the United States and Mexico, it's the most important economy in the region. And so, it's very important for us to continue to follow what's happening in Brazil. Moving on to Peru. In Peru, their Congress narrowly confirmed President Castillo's cabinet, that's a good thing. Nick, you sent me something. I did read it. I don't know if you want to talk about it, but we covered this already here in Nuestra America on a previous episode. But obviously, we all know that Hector Bajaras was forced to resign, and many leftist intellectuals and thinkers came out in support of Hector and thought that this was not a good thing, obviously, for Peru, and that this was a setback for the Castillo administration, and this could be the beginning of a potential coup. So I don't know if you want to take it from there.
Yeah, like you said, we touched upon it a little bit. Hector Bejar was the foreign minister of Castillo's in Castillo's administration, forced to resign. And part of the fear, he did an interview recently, and part of the fear that he mentioned was that there's pressure coming from the right wing and reactionary forces in Peru, both in politics, but also from the armed forces, who are pushing the government to really restrict and limit its acceptance of certain left wing or socialist politicians, leaders, academics, whatever it might be. And so, this is looking like they're going to try to push limits on Castillo. What was interesting, though, was that first piece of news that you brought up, which I saw was just like only a day old, which is that the Congress actually, that the Congress accepted a lot of his cabinet officials, right? They
narrowly approved it, and there was one quote from one congressman who said this may be the most, we've now accepted the most something along the lines of the most mediocre cabinet in the history of the republic, or something along the lines, so that lets you know what the right thinks of,
right. But they still look, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because they still confirmed the cabinet, right?
Right.
Now, obviously, they had a problem with Bejar, which is probably why they pushed him out before they even did these confirmations. But at the end of the day, he still has he made it through the hard part with the majority of his officials. it seems like from a lot of these interviews, Behar is a little bit, hurt that he got pushed out. At least the one I sent you, I don't know if you got a chance to look at it, but
I did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he seemed a little bit like cautious, wary of what the right-wing forces are trying to do. But at the same time, it's like, look, if it's just one guy who they push out of official, or two, and you got to keep the rest of them, and they're all pretty much like social democrats, progressive, socialists, I would say that's pretty good for the Castillo. That's pretty good for Peru Libre. And what's most important too isn't really so much the individuals themselves, but what, are you going, is Castillo going from Behar, someone who supports Cuba, someone who supports the Bolivarian Revolution, to, someone who's the exact opposite, who's right wing, and is going to say Maduro is a dictator? No, Castillo's not doing that, right? He's going to replace him with someone who still has that kind of ideological line, hopefully. So, I think for the most part, it's not looking as dangerous as it was previously, but we should still keep an eye on a potential, just the different restrictions and limitations that Congress and the Parliament is going to put on Castillo's administration. Because the reality is that in the Parliament, Castillo doesn't have the majority of the support, right? He's going to have to build coalitions. He's going to have to compromise on some things. He's going to have to play politics.
Yeah, and so I will say this. I will use my experience, which, I don't want to, it's not apples to apples, but I will use my experience as someone who's been a political operative at the local level and been in those backroom deals, if you will. Again, politics is very crass. Anybody who has any illusions about that, then you don't understand politics. It's crass. It's cutthroat. It's crass. It's you have to understand that that's the reality of politics. You take ethics and all that stuff out the window. It has nothing to do with that. It's about power. So I say all that to say that, that was probably the deal. It was probably like, look, we'll approve. Because again, his political party is a minority in Congress. So that was probably the deal. Like, you got to get this guy out of here, or we're going to give you hell. So for whatever reason, they focused on him. And it sort of lines up, perfectly, right? So he was forced to resign, and then his cabinet was accepted by voted on by Congress, and so that was probably the deal that took place. It's like, we'll approve your cabinet, but this guy's got to go. And if that's his reality, what are you going to say to that? Right? You say, no, we're not doing that. Again, this is chess. You're trying to play. This is a long-term game that the leftists are going to have to play. And I'll remind folks that he won by marginal vote, and the capitalist ruling class is in charge of basically all institutions in Peru. Right. So that's what you're dealing with. So you have to know how to play chess. And by the way, I'm not justifying it either. I'm just saying that that's the reality. That's the reality. And all right, so we're going to close out with Colombia. I have back-to-back headlines I want to read, and then I'll give my take, and then I'll wait for yours, Nick. So murders of human rights and community activists are down from last year. The Duque government blames Marxist guerrillas for the death. So that's one piece of information, right? Here's the next piece of information. Washington Post headline. I'm going to pull this up because I didn't even write a summary for this, but here's the headline. It's called, this is from Washington Post. Prosecutors pursue murder charges against Colombia's former army chief in false positive killings of civilians. Now, I'm going to pull this up. I'm doing this intentionally because this was just too interesting to me to just try to sum up. I want to read most, if not all of it. And of course, here we go. Give me just a second. I was having a little technical difficulty. Yeah. Now, remember what I just said in that first piece of information there about Colombia and who the government is blaming, right? They're blaming, of course, the Marxist guerrillas are the ones to blame, right? But check this out from the Washington Post. This is from 4 days ago. Piece written by Samantha Schmidt at the Washington Post. On a Sunday morning in 2008, Idali Gacera Valdez returned from a visit with family to find her apartment empty. her 26-year-old son gone, and a note posted on her front door. Don't worry, read the note from Diego Tamayo Garcera. I'll be back on Monday. Days earlier, her son had told her he had been invited to travel to the Colombian coast for a job opportunity and a chance to see the sea for the first time. Instead, his mother would later learn he was taken hundreds of miles from their home in Soacha, just outside of Bogota, to rural Norte de Santander department. He was handed over to members of the Colombian army and on August 25th shot and killed, one of thousands of people slain by government forces and then falsely labeled as guerrilla fighters to boost the number of enemy casualties in the country's half-century-long civil war, according to a Colombian court. So actually, I'm going to just stop there because I don't think we need to go further than that, right? I mean, there's no, that's the situation you have in Colombia. You have community activists and human rights activists getting gunned down, right? And the Duque government, who are they blaming? Oh, no, it's the communists. It's the communist guerrillas. But we know there's a long history there of paramilitary forces and government forces going after communists and going after activists and going after day laborers and laborers and going after human rights activists. Like, we know this. So why would you take Duque's word for it? They've been lying for decades about this.
Yeah, I mean, imagine the I don't even know, like the guts you gotta have to blame Marxists for the killing of civilians, as your former army chief is literally under investigation, under lawsuit for killing civilians. And I love how the Washington Post phrased that too. It called why would they use the term false positives, killings of civilians? The dude was just straight up systematically and institutionally through the army murdering like innocent people, and just murdering like random people. It was a genocide. What it was a genocide committed by the government, and it's still ongoing. So it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing that these folks, they will never get prosecuted or seen in the same way. Duque won't be seen as a dictator, and the army chief will probably never have his name put out there. They will never be seen in the same way as the propaganda has us see people like Maduro or Chavez, calling them dictators, calling them, mass murderers. They'll never portray Duque and, all of the army officials and the cabinet officials and all of the politicians who support him. They'll never portray them in the same light. And, really, the reality is that they're it's not that they're the same as Maduro or Chavez. It's that they're extremely worse. They're on two opposite ends of the spectrum, right?
Absolutely. I just found it hilarious, just to read that, as soon as I read that part, right, I got to that part, the Duque government immediately blaming, and this is what they do. This is what they do in the media, in the Colombian media, and then the Western media picks up on it, and we regurgitate the same thing out here. And by the way, look, let's be clear, the civil war that you had there in Colombia, I guess you could still argue that there's still a civil war. There are casualties of war. Things get ugly. Things get crazy, right? There's nothing but to immediately just say, well, all of these killings are due to this one group over here. I mean, it's crazy. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out, and while I spent time in the Dominican Republic, my political party had, delegates over in Cuba, and they informed me of some of the negotiations that were taking place in Cuba, and these Marxist guerrillas, they should have always been recognized internationally as belligerents. There's a legal term for them. They're not terrorists. They're not gangs. They're political. They're belligerents. There was a civil war happening in Colombia. They deserve that recognition of being a political force in the country. And in fact, there's still a political force in the country. So you have to deal with that reality. These are, it drives me crazy when, and even here in the United States, Asada Shakur, she's on the FBI's most wanted list, because she's the way they characterize her, right, without mentioning that she's political. It's political, right? You can't take that, you know, people, especially given the history of this country, you know, when you're talking about the Black Liberation Army, the Black Panthers, the Young Lords, the people who, revolutionaries who fought, you know, for certain things because they were political. They were political. They have a right. They have a right. They have a right. And that, if that means using violence, you know, again, wherever you stand on the issue, it doesn't matter. They're political. All right. They're political. The American revolutionaries were violent. They were violent. Right. So, you know, it just drives me crazy that we don't give people the recognition that they deserve, and want to immediately put certain labels on them. And then what that does is that immediately dismisses them. And again, in terms of public perception, is like, well, no, those people were crazy. They were this, they were that. You know, you put all these type of pejoratives and denigrate these people because you completely take away that political nature of these movements and of these people, and then just label them a terrorist or a gang member or this or that.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, look, under international law, you have a right as a colonized people to take up arms against the colonizer.
That's right.
That's international law. And it's known, as a Puerto Rican, it's well known because that was one of the things that we attested to the UN, right? All kinds of Puerto Ricans have brought that up to the UN. Look, we have a right to do what we need to do in order to get free against the United States. If that means taking up arms, if that means engaging in armed struggle, then so be it, right? But you can't prosecute or persecute us for upholding one of our legal rights that goes beyond the national. It's international, right? And even then, even with that appeal to on legal grounds, right? That stands. That you can't deny that. Even with that appeal, they still portray, those Puerto Ricans as terrorists, as thugs. Filiberto is looked down upon by even some on the left in the U.S. today because he engaged in armed struggle, right? The FALN, the machateros, right, are seen as terrorists or thugs, when in reality that's not who they are. What they are is they're people fighting for the liberation of their colonized land, right? But when the U.S. and when the Western powers are the ones in charge of these international laws and they're the ones who are denoting what these groups are. If these groups aren't in favor or aren't in the allied to these Western imperialist interests, then they're going to be seen as criminals, as thugs, as terrorists. That's why Saudi Arabia can be seen as an ally, even though they commit some of the worst abuses that we've ever seen, beheading people, cutting people's hands off, whatever it might be. But folks part of the ELN or the FALN or even people who are in charge of whole fucking countries, like the Sandinistas or even the Cubans, all of them get labeled as terrorists simply because they dare to stand up to the U.S. imperialists.
And this is always a question of power. Like none of these labels mean anything if we were to have power, right? You carry out a successful revolution, and you go from criminal terrorist to revolutionary, right? It doesn't. So but nonetheless, you still you want to in the court of public opinion, it's important that we point out these contradictions and explain to people that your quote unquote terrorist is my revolutionary, and so it's really, really important to explain that to folks. I think that's going to wrap it up. Nick, any parting shots before we get out of here?
Nah, I mean, that was most of the news I've seen today. Unless you got anything to add.
Nah. I want to thank the audience as usual. I see a lot of the comments, and I apologize I didn't get to any of your comments this week, but I appreciate everybody tuning in. Appreciate everybody supporting us. Join an anti-imperialist organization. Consider donating to us. We've donated over $100,000 to different revolutionary progressive struggles and organizations in Latin America and the Caribbean. Check us out, anticonquista.com. Please like, please share, please subscribe. We are on all social media platforms. And we hope you enjoyed the initial topic and discussion. And we do please encourage folks to, be in solidarity with one another. And you know, if we were to really ever try to create a successful movement here in the United States, we got to do away from those, you know, again, you could even have the tendencies, but you need to be able to reach across and talk to other folks, and focus on things that are going to make an impact in our communities, and in our world today. Getting into intellectual discussions and debates about things that are not relevant today, are not going to further advance our struggles today, really, it doesn't do anything for us. The colonized must unite. Somebody just wrote, absolutely. And my hopes is that one day we create a revolutionary brown movement here in the United States, that will tie into the revolutionary movement that you're seeing in Latin America. Once again, we thank you, folks. And that'll be it. Take care.
Definitely. Have a good one, man.